Okay, so if you clicked on this video, you must be interested in making beats, and whether it's just a hobby or you're thinking about taking it full time, getting started can feel overwhelming. There's so much information out there, the software looks confusing, and you might not even know where to begin with making music. Well, in this video, I've got you covered because I'm going to break down everything you need to know to get started in FL Studio, including which version to choose, how to navigate the software, add your own sounds, install plugins, build your first beat, start mixing, recording, arrange your track, and even how to export it so you can distribute your music. I'll be keeping it really simple and digestible, so by the end of this video, you should be well on your way to making your first beat. If you're wondering who I am, my name's Cactus. I've been a full-time producer for over 5 years now, and I've worked with artists such as Gigs, Noisy, Skinny Flex, French the Kid, and way more. And if you want to dive a bit deeper, I've created a whole beginner's course completely free, which goes step by step. It gives you access to a community of like-minded producers and a whole bundle of high-quality sounds for you to use. You can grab it by clicking the link in the description or by scanning the QR code here. And for my regular viewers, this doesn't mean that my tutorials won't be advanced anymore. I just wanted to give something free to people who were looking to start a new hobby this year. But with all that being said, let's get straight into it. Alright, so let's start off with which version of FL Studio you'll actually need. A lot of people ask me what version to get, and most of the time I say get the producer version. It is the most popular one, and that's because the entry level one, the Fruity Edition, it doesn't have many features. You can't record audio with it. You have an audio clip limit of 8. So if you're going to be using things like samples, or you'll be dragging sounds in from various kits like the ones you can download from me, then you're going to quickly go over that limit. So I'd usually say just get the producer version. You get more than enough plugins with it. You can record audio, use unlimited audio clips, and you get access to all of the playlist features, which I'll talk about soon. The main difference with the producer edition, signature, and all plugins edition is just the amount of plugins that you get. And that can be anything from effect plugins to various instruments. But you can always upgrade if you need to. So if you start with the producer edition, you can just pay to upgrade to the signature or all plugins edition anyway. If you're really on a budget and you just want to see what FL's like, then just download the demo for free and see if you can get familiar with the interface, and then when the time's right you can upgrade to the edition that you want. So when you've chosen your edition and you've installed it, when you open up FL Studio, you'll see something like this. On the left you'll see some recent projects, but if this is your first time then you won't have any obviously. And on the right you'll have some options to start new projects with plugins and sounds already loaded. For the most part, if we're just making beats, you won't really need any of these. I've got this default basic soft clipper preset set up, but we can just go ahead and start an empty project. Now the first time you start a project it can look really confusing, but you just need to get familiar with some of the main parts, and those main parts are up here. So the first one is the playlist. The playlist is going to be where you arrange your whole track. So you'll build out certain patterns within the channel rack, which is this one, and then at the end of that you'll piece everything together within the playlist and you'll build out your song here. So think about the playlist as building out your song, and think about the channel rack as building out the patterns within your song. The piano roll is going to be where you build out most of your melodies, and you can use the piano roll within any sound. So whether you drag a drum sample in or a piano, guitar, or anything else, you can build out a melody within that using the piano roll. It's essentially just a piano on its side, so the higher up you go, the higher it will sound, the lower you go, the lower the tone will be. The mixer is where you're going to add all of your effects. So you have this master channel, which is where everything's rooted, so anything that you add to the master channel is going to affect every sound that you're using. And then you also have these individual inserts which you can link sounds to. So when you bring sounds into the playlist, or if you bring them to the channel rack, you can route them from here to individual inserts. So for example, if you had a piano, you could route that to insert 1 and then start adding some effects like reverb, delay, or anything else you might want to add. And they work in order too, so anything that you add to slot 1 will be the first effect in the chain, and then in slot 2 it will go through slot 1 first and then hit slot 2. So for example, if you added reverb to slot 1 and then delay to slot 2, the delay will also affect the reverb, but we'll get more into that soon. The next main section is the browser or the plugin picker, and this is where you'll access all of your sounds. So if you've downloaded my free bundle, then you'll find it within the browser once you've located the folder, but I'll show you that in a second. So I've set up a folder called FL Studio Packs and then Cactus Packs, and here's where I keep all of my sounds. So for example, if I go to my Sacred Trap Suite, I could go to my drums, and I have all of my 808s here. And by the way, if you want to check out any of my premium sounds and bundles, they're all available on jcactus.com. So you can go there, or I'll leave a link in the description, and use the code COURSE20 to get 20% off everything. Within the kits, you can star some of your favorite sounds. So for example, if you're always using this one and that one, you can quickly access it here. And that way you don't have to waste time browsing through all of the kits again. And then to go back to the sounds, just click here. And if you're getting a bit lost, just hit this button and it'll collapse everything. Also, if you accidentally move things and it starts looking confusing, just go to View, Arrange Windows, and Realign. Within the browser, you can also go to the current project and you can start undoing things if you've made mistakes. You can also find your plugins from here, so effects and generators. You can find various sounds you've downloaded for plugins. And you can also see FL Cloud. This is a little bit separate to FL Studio because it is a subscription service, but here's where you can access thousands of sounds, anything from drum samples to melodic loops and starters. I even have my own collection in here, so if you go to packs, you can see me right there. And these are sounds that I've made. I've just created a collection of my favorite sounds within FL Cloud. So you can preview them. And then if you like it, you can hit the download button and you can drag that straight into the playlist ready to use. And you can see from the options here, you can actually sync it with your project BPM. And if you're wondering what BPM is, it stands for beats per minute. And it's essentially the tempo of your beat. And you can change that by dragging this up and down here. So right now I've got the project set to 140 beats per minute, which is quite standard for things like drill and trap. You also need to pay attention to this area here because if you've got pattern mode selected, when you hit play, it's going to play anything in the current pattern. So anything that you build in the current channel rack. But then if you go to song mode, it will play anything in the playlist. When we get to arranging beats, you'll see that you can add patterns within the playlist and build out the full song there. But if you're building something in the playlist and you realize it's not actually playing, then it's probably because you've got pattern mode activated. If you have this button checked, it's the metronome. So this is going to give you a click on every beat. That's just going to help you stay in time if you're recording something. You can see if I bring the BPM down to something like 90, which is good for boom bap, you're going to hear it's playing slower. So there's less beats per minute. Before we start building a melody, to actually install the sounds that you've downloaded, just hit F10 and then go to File, or you can click Options and then File Settings. And any folder that you add within this section will show up in the browser. For example, if you're saving all of your sounds on the desktop, just click this folder, go to Desktop, and then select Folder. Once you come out of that, you're just going to need to hit refresh. You can also right click on one of these and then select open, and this will show you the directory. So these packs actually come with FL Studio. So if you wanted to keep all of your downloaded sounds within that, you might just want to create a new folder here. And again, just hit refresh and they should show up. All right, so to build a melody, I like to start with a piano just because it's really easy to hear the notes with a piano, and then you can swap it out if you want. To open a plugin, you want to make sure that you're in the channel rack first. Then you can click this button here and you'll see the plugins that you get. If you've downloaded third-party plugins and installed them, just click more plugins, manage plugins, hit find installed plugins, and then it's going to search for anything that's been installed. For example, I like addictive keys for piano, so I've downloaded that, and then I like to hit the star button so it shows up in my favorites. If you missed that there, you can also access it by going to more plugins, search for it, and then you can add the star there. That just means it's going to show up straight away here without having to go to more plugins. FL Keys is the free piano that comes with FL Studio, but we'll use addictive keys just because I prefer the sound of it. If you want to delete a plugin, just click there, hit Alt and delete, and then OK, or you can right click and select delete. Now to start building a melody, first we're going to click there and then we can hit F7 to go to the piano roll, or we can right click on the plugin and select piano roll there. Now you'll see when I click in a note, we're going to actually hear the piano. If you don't know about music theory, I'd recommend clicking here, going to View, Scale highlighting, and then selecting a scale. If you want to make something dark, go for minor natural, and then we can start with something like C or D. If you can't see the highlighted grid, just make sure that's checked. If you right click, it will check it without closing this structure. So a scale is essentially a group of notes that we as humans have decided sound good together. And you can see we picked D minor. Now anything that's highlighted will be in the D minor scale. And now that we can see the scale, we can start building out a chord progression because chords are the foundation of the majority of melodies. If you don't know what a chord is, essentially it's a group of notes played together. And there's a few basic ones you can learn. For example, we could start on D, we'll skip a note in the scale, and then skip another one. So you can see we've missed these two. Make sure we're on pattern mode here. We'll bring that BPM up to 140 again. Hit space to play. That's a D minor chord. So that's the pattern for any standard minor chord. You go up 3, 1, 2, 3, and then up 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. To make it a major chord, you just bring this middle note up 1. But D major doesn't fit the D minor scale, so we'll stick with D minor. To build on this chord, you can skip another note in the scale to create a 7th, skip another one to make a ninth. You'll get more of a jazzy vibe. Now, a good technique to get started is just by picking any note in the scale. I've started with D, but you don't have to. And then you can pick another one. For example, we'll go to A sharp or B flat, same thing. Skip a note in the scale, skip another one. Let's say you like that, you can pick another note. So we'll choose A, skip a note in the scale, skip another one. Hold Control and left click to highlight this. And then if we drag it out, it will play this chord for longer. See how this sounds. So I like that. We just built our first chord progression. Now what you can also do is play with inversions and the voicing of the chord progression. And all that means is the positioning of the notes. For example, the D minor chord has D, F, and A. If I hold Control, left click, and highlight A. If I press Control and down, we're still using the note A, but it's further down in the scale. So we're going to get a bit of a different sound. So I'm feeling that. If we undo that, you could try this one, maybe that as well. And it's all about experimenting. Same chord progression, but you get a different vibe. And then to thicken up the sound, you could take the root notes, which are the first notes in the chord. So remember, we chose D minor, then we went to A sharp, and then A. We just changed the positioning of these two. We're going to press Shift and left click, and that will copy the notes. Then we'll press Control and down, and maybe we'll bring these two back down as well. And now we've got some bass. Right? So most melodies will have 3 layers. You'll have some bass covering the low end, you'll have the chords covering the midsection, and then you'll build out some sort of counter melody on top. And with counter melodies, there's really no rules. You're just going to have to experiment and see what sounds right to you. That's why I recommended highlighting a scale, because if you stick within the scale, there's a good chance it's going to sound right. For example, let's just click some random notes in, drag that out, maybe to the end, and then just 2 more here. Now we've got a top line too. That sounds right. Some useful techniques for top lines is to use notes that are already within the chord. So you can see the F sounds right there because we're using F in the chord. Same with A sharp there. G is not in that chord, but still sounded right. But E and A are. But again, there's no rules with counter melodies. You don't have to start at the beginning. You can start wherever. And it's all about trial and error. Another thing you could do is highlight the chords. Press Shift and click to copy them. Control and up to bring them up an octave. And then press Alt and A. And this is going to bring up the arpeggiator, which will break up the chord. So for example, we could bring this range up. We could change it from normal to flip to alternate. And then you can increase the amount of notes. So for example, just an easy way to get a quick counter melody. I want to make something a bit darker. So I'm going to start with the D minor chord. To make a dark melody, you just don't want to change the progression too much. For example, we could press Control and A, then Control and B to copy it. Bring this one down. Maybe we'll bring these 2 down. Bring everything up. We'll just start building a melody. Also, if you press C, it's going to activate the slice tool, which you can access from up here. Then if you left click and drag down, you can make cuts. So this will separate the 2. So then it plays twice. And then press P to go back to the draw tool. It's also useful if your notes are too long. You can hit C, Shift, right click, and that's going to trim the smallest end. Bring that back. If you're pressing Control and B to copy and it's doing something like this, it means you haven't got the right area highlighted. So you could just right click and then highlight the section from up here. We've got 2 bars highlighted. And we can see that because it's going from 1 to 3. Press Control and B, it's going to copy it. And we can change something in this section. Could bring this up. And then just make 1 more cut there. There we go. I'm going to add some bass notes in. So we could do it here or an octave down. Just see what sounds right. I think something like this. There we go. If I really wanted to thicken that up, I could copy these up an octave. So I'm feeling this now. Now you might notice it's sounding a little bit robotic, and that's because everything's being played at the same velocity and everything's perfectly in time, which obviously that wouldn't happen if it was someone actually playing a piano. So there's some shortcuts we can use. We can press Alt and R, and this will bring up the randomizer. If it's looking like that, just turn pattern off. and just bring the velocity down. And you can see at the bottom here that we're getting more of a natural or random velocity, which is the volume, or essentially how hard the piano is being played. If we press Alt and S, it's going to strum the piano. So instead of the notes playing at exactly the same time, it's going to increase it gradually. So instead of, it's going to be more like, and you can bring up the intensity here. And I like to use preserve ends so they don't overlap. You can also do that by manually moving some of them off grid. And to do that, I usually hold Alt, left click, and then drag. You can do that with the velocity as well. So you could hold Control left click to highlight a note and then use Alt and the mouse wheel to turn down the velocity, or from this section here. But don't worry too much about that now. Just get used to making some melodies. So for the most part, you'll want to start with a 4-bar pattern. And you can see that from the numbers up here going from 1 to 5. And then for some variation, we could press Control and B to make it an 8-bar pattern. And then just change something in this section. For example, we could just add some more notes here. See how this sounds. There we go. Don't worry about making your first melody amazing. Just play with some different scales and chord progressions, and then once you have the sound that you like, we can either change the instrument, layer it, or start processing them. So if I go back to the channel rack, I might want to add another top line like a violin. So let's open Flex because Flex is a stock plugin. We'll go to Essential Strings, and we'll just use the violin sustain. Sustain is just going to mean you're playing longer notes instead of short staccato ones. Again, we can hit F7 or right click and select piano roll. If you can't see the notes of the piano, just click up here, go to view, and just make sure Ghost Channels is selected. So now we can either think of another counter melody, or we could just emphasize some of the notes in the previous one. For example, we could do something like this. Copy that. Maybe bring this up. So that works. You'll also notice that you can see these grids in between, and that's going to help you snap the notes to it. If that's not working, just click this and then make sure you've either got line checked or one of the others like half step. If I zoom in, you're going to see how that changes things. So with line, you've got 4, and then for a quarter, you've got more. Half step, a little bit less. And a quick way to clean things up is, let's say you've got a note that's a little bit off and you want it to start from the beginning. Just highlight the note and press Control and Q, and that's going to quantize it, which means it will snap it to the grid. I'm going to change this a little bit because you can add some breaks. You don't have to have notes all the way through. Just keep it simple. Something like this. It's a really simple counter melody. There we go. To turn up the volume, we can do that with this button here, or we can do it in the mixer, which we'll get into soon. Now, with each new sound we add, we don't always have to create a new melody. Sometimes we can just layer things to get interesting sounds and textures. For example, we might want to layer those main chords with something like a choir to get a more dramatic feel. So I'm going to pull up Labs, which is a free plugin by Spitfire, which I highly recommend. And we'll just use this free choir that it's got. I'm going to click this button to activate the keys. We'll press Control and C to copy. Go to Labs and press Control and V. Now if we go into the piano roll, I don't want this top line. I just want to use the chords. So you can either right click over notes to delete them, or you can press Control left click, highlight them, and then hit the delete button. So I'm going to bring that back because I just want to use the main chord notes. So we'll just follow that process. Get rid of this. Hit Control and Q to quantize them. I don't need to strum the choir. And then either Control and B to copy, or Shift left click and drag over. Might be able to get rid of the bass as well. So now you can hear it's kind of subtle, but just making it sound a bit more dramatic. And we could even pitch this up or down an octave. So kind of like it there. Yeah, that's the solo. To mute sounds, you can just click this button. Or to solo them, you can right click and hit solo. And then to unsolo, just right click on it again and hit solo. For For layering, there's no set rules, so just experiment and see what combinations sound right to you. And for the amount of sounds you'll need for a beat, again, there's no rules, man. Some beats are really simple and some are very complex, so it depends on the style you like. If you have like 3 or 4 instruments for the melody, it's more than enough to get started with. And I'm trying to keep this as simple as possible so you can follow along, so I'll try not to overdo it. But within this channel rack, we could start renaming the sounds as well, and that's going to be important for when you actually export the beat. Now we want to think about processing these, so remember we said we can do that in the mixer, and there's a number of ways you can send these to the mixer. You can either open the plugin, click this button and hit track there, or you can drag this up and down to assign it to a mixer channel, or we can do it all together. So we can click there and drag down to highlight, hit Control and L from the channel rack, or you can go to the mixer first, select an empty insert like insert 1, press Control, Shift and L, and that's going to link them in order. And we renamed it in the channel rack so that when it's sent to the mixer, the names correspond here. And now if we hit play, you can see how loud each sound's hitting. So we can use the faders to bring up the volume, and then we can use these slots to add effects. So let's add something simple to the piano. We'll pull up Fruity Reverb 2, and we'll just use a preset called Cathedral. And we'll bring down the wet level. The wet level is the amount of process signal, so the actual reverb, and the dry level is the dry signal going into it, so the original piano. If you increase the wet level, then you've got more of the reverb. So you want to find a good balance. I'll go into everything way more in depth in the actual free course that I've made, but essentially reverb will put sounds in an environment, and it's to do with reflection. So think about if you were singing in a bathroom, what sound that would give you. That would be the reverb of the bathroom. We can also use this tool here to pan it left and right, so maybe we want the violin to the right. And if you had something for another counter melody, you could pan that to the left to balance things out. To change the order up here, just use the mouse wheel and it will bring the plugin down. And then in slot 1, we could add something like a delay. Let's change the time to 4, or we'll just bring the input volume down and the feedback, which is how long the delays will carry on for. And if we select ping pong mode and change the panning, you're going to hear the delay go from the left to right ear, or vice versa. So this is without any plugins, and then with. And if you want to quickly deactivate the plugins, just hit that. So you can hear it's dry. Now we've got delay and reverb. What we could also do is add an EQ to the choir. Don't worry too much about the EQ for now because I do go through it in depth in the course. But if you bring down one of these points, you're essentially bringing down the volume of that frequency range. Every sound has a frequency range. So if I solo this choir by right clicking there, you can see we've got sub and bass information over here, mid-range information over here, and high, mids, and treble up here. So you can imagine things like bass instruments will take up more of this area, vocals will take up more of this region, and then anything high like hi-hats, cymbals, triangles would be up here. So we've got this choir covering this region, and if you bring a point and bring it down, we're just turning down the volume of the high information. So we can create these filters. And you can also change the steepness of the curve. So when we're mixing, we like to give each instrument its own space. So if you had too many instruments covering up the bass frequencies, you'll start to hear things fighting for space. It will sound quite muddy, or the frequencies will be clashing. I know I'm going to want to add a bass to this soon. So in the piano, we can pull up EQ. We'll bring that before the delay. We'll bring this down. We'll change the order to steep 8. And I'm just going to bring this down, which is going to turn down the volume of the bass frequencies. And I'm only doing that because I know I'm going to want to add an 808 soon. So that'll be with, and that's with them turned down. So that can be useful if you're going to add things like a sub bass or an 808, which is going to take up the majority of that space. But we'll leave it off for now because I want to show you something else. If we go to the playlist, remember this is where we can build out the song, and you can see your patterns in this section here. So I'm going to drag this pattern in, bring that to the start. We'll click on it so we can see it up here. Click this arrow and then split by channel. And this is going to split everything in that channel into a separate pattern. So now we've got the piano, violins, and choir. I'm going to take that, press Ctrl and B to copy it. We'll take out the violins in this section by right clicking, and then we could copy this over and just take the choir out there. Now what we're going to do is go to the mixer, go to the master, hit this button, press Alt and R, make sure song selection is on, and then just hit start. Now this is going to convert that whole pattern in the playlist into one WAV file. It's essentially rendered it. And if we right click there to solo, we can hear it's all together. I like to do this because audio files are easier to manipulate compared to MIDI. For example, if I double click in this, I'm going to set this to auto. If I bring this up, every 100 cent is one note on the piano. So if I bring it up 200 cents, it's going to go up 2 notes on the piano. So we're going from D to E if I bring it up 200 cents. And now we've changed the key. You can do that within MIDI, but this way it's just going to make it sound a little bit different. We can also hit reverse and see what sound we get with the whole melody reversed. Pitch that down one. That sounds crazy. Now if we press C to activate the cut tool, we can start making some cuts. So we can make a cut on every bar, and then we can start rearranging these. And this is like resampling your melody essentially. Follow that process here. I'm also going to go back in and change this to generic bleeding, and that should eliminate any clicks or pops that you can hear. Crazy. So I much prefer that to the standard melody we had. And we'll just carry on that process. Now everything else I don't need for now, so we can right click to delete. We'll bring this up, and now we've got this whole new melody. This part with the piano and choir, and then the strings here. Now because we've rendered this, it's not going to have an insert because this is a new audio file. So we could just click here, we'll rename this to chopped melody. Double click in there, hit track, and it's going to send it to another empty insert. Now we're going to add a pattern for the drums. So we're going to click this, just name this drums, and then just click underneath, bring that back. And you'll want to start with either a 4-bar or an 8-bar pattern for drums. And then we can repeat this. So whatever we add in this drum pattern will be repeated here. And to actually go to that pattern, you can either double click or just make sure it's selected from this section and then click the channel rack. Now anything that you add in this channel rack will be within this pattern in the playlist. Let's go to my drum kits and we'll go to the vault. This is a really good bundle I have for a variety of genres. So R&B, drill, boom bap, and trap. So we'll go to the Trap Lords trap kit. We'll go to snares. We'll start with my favorite one, the beef snare. So all we're going to do is left click and drag that underneath. If you drag it on top of something, it's going to replace it. So you don't want to do that unless it's intentional. Usually when you open a sound, I like to right click here and select reset. That's because sometimes FL Studio will try to stretch it to match your BPM, but we don't need that for individual sounds. And then I turn off loop points. Sometimes you'll add a sound and you'll hear it replaying over and over, and it's because loop points has been activated. So just keep that off. Now we can start adding some simple patterns. So in the channel rack, it's really easy to see. Every time the color changes, it's a new beat within the bar. So if I play this with the metronome on, we're going to hear 4 beats per every bar. And that's just a modern time signature for most hip hop beats. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4. And then it goes back around. For trap, the snare usually lands on the 3rd beat. So you'll see. We could turn the metronome off. Could add another one too. Press Control and B to copy that. Then let's go to hi-hats. Just bring the essential one in. Now for hi-hats, you could start by right-clicking and selecting fill each 2-step. Now you've got a really simple pattern. You could fill in some others. To get some quick rolls. You can also click up here and go to repeat. Now we can add these rolls here. So if you look, I've got a note here. The higher I add one, the more intense the roll will be. Right click to delete, you'll hear it slower. So that can be a quick way to add rolls. You can also hit F7 to go to the piano roll. Just click on any of the notes to start, because then when you add it somewhere else, it will be the same length. You can also change the pitch. So the higher up you go, the higher it will sound. Same with bringing it lower. And then you can drag some of the notes out, hold Control left click to highlight, and then hit Alt and U to bring up the chopper. If you bring that up, there'll be less notes. Bring it down, it'll be more intense. So let's say you like that, we could hit accept. If you click the magnet button, we could choose something like quarter step or half step. And now you can see there's more lines in the grid, so you can start to manually add rolls. Or we could start getting creative by bringing some notes down. So again, no rules with this, just experiment and see what sounds right to you. I also have some MIDI files you could use. So for example, if you go to the Sacred Trap Suite, the drums, and then the MIDIs, go to hi-hat MIDIs, and you could drag any of these in just to see how they sound. So that can be a quick way to get some inspiration. Let's try this one. This one sounds hard. So copy this, and maybe add a little break. So for example here. And we could bring these down. Crazy. Let's add another snare. I really like this gunner one for the in-between snares, just to create more bounce. Something like this. Maybe we'll get rid of that and use it there instead. You could also add rolls with the snares as well, so same process as the hi-hats. I don't think it needs it in this one. Right, let's grab an 808. One of the most common ones is the spins. So we'll go to the bonus essentials and use the spins. Now when you're using 808s, as soon as you drag them in, you want to reset that with Alt and left click or right click and reset. Keep loop points off, and also right click on the sound and select cut itself. And this will stop the notes overlapping. So when one hits and the second one plays, they won't play at the same time. Just so you can see what I'm doing, I'm going to go to the piano that we created. We'll press Control and C, then go to the drums. In the sampler, because you won't hear anything in there, I'm going to press Control and V. And if you remember, we brought the melody down 100 cents, which is one semitone. So all that is this whole melody going down one note. We'll press Shift and down. And now when I open the 808 in the piano roll, we can see the notes that we used. We can also change the scale highlighting and set that to C sharp, which is one note down. Now when you add in a bass or an 808, you'll usually want to follow the root notes of the chords. And it'll be somewhere around C5. When you start getting down to like G4, then they just sound a bit too low. So you might want to use the notes further up. So let's add this. We'll turn it right up. So we'll just come up with a simple pattern. And you can hear these ones are just sounding a bit too low. So we'll bring those up an octave. It's a really simple pattern. Let's copy that. I'll bring this one up an octave for variation. Add another note. Maybe we'll cut that so it's 2. And then just so it matches the melody more, we could even bring this up to B. So that's a really simple and common 808 pattern you can follow. And again, I go through patterns like this way more in depth in the course. If you're wondering why the note's playing longer than the actual note in the piano roll, it's because we need to adjust the envelope for these sounds. So if we click into the sound, go to this tool here, activate the envelope, and then bring everything down that's set for the hold. And that's just going to make the note play for as long as we hold it. So you could do it like that, and then if you want the notes to join up, just press Control and L. Then you have a little bit more control. Now we could also add a kick. So let's go to kicks. I really like this overkill one. We'll select this, press Control and C, select here, then press Control and V. This will copy the kick pattern in, but with the kick, we don't really need to change the pitch as much. You can adjust it a little bit if you don't think it's sounding right, but it definitely doesn't need to change like this. So we're going to press Alt and K, and you might see something like this at first. So just left click and drag this down so that everything's highlighting on D. Also right click D if it's not showing up right, set that to C, and you can see it's going to wrap everything to the C note. C5 is usually the default note in FL Studio. So if you're previewing sounds in here, when you drag it into the channel rack, the first note will be C5. Actually going to turn that down a bit. So the kick usually follows the 808 pattern, but not all the time. And we might just want to take some of the notes out. And you might think that it's sounding really distorted, and that's because if we look in the mixer, you can see it's going way into the red. So on the master, in any of the slots, we're going to open Fruity Soft Clipper. I'm not going to get too technical with mixing right now. I'll go through it in a bit more in depth in the course. But in really simple terms, it's going to stop things going over 0 dB. And dB stands for decibels. It's just a unit of measurement we use to see how loud something is. And because it's on the master, it's going to be affecting everything. So any sound that's going over 0 dB in the mixers will be routed to the master and then the soft clipper. So now if you look, we're getting that nice punch, but we're not going over 0 dB. But you just want to find the sweet spot. Again, if it's too loud, it's going to clip the sound too much. So you want that punch, but you don't want a flat sound. I feel like that's a good sweet spot. Let's quickly name these as well. We can start adding in some other sounds, like an open hat. Really simple. Let's copy that. Could also layer sounds. So for example, we could bring in a perk and maybe layer that with one of the snares. Try it with the last one. So again, play around with some percussion, some different bounces, and just see what sounds good to you. Could bring this rim in, just do something like this. Copy that over. Yeah, there we go. We'll rename these as well. Highlight them all, send them all to inserts with Control Shift and L, and we'll just give it a quick mix. So usually the kick is the loudest, followed by the 808, and then the snare. Hi-hat usually sits somewhere underneath that, and then we'll have the percussion, the second snare. We've got that snare pan to the left, so we'll bring this rim to the right, and maybe the same with the laser and the open hat, just to balance things out. Now my melodies usually sitting somewhere around -6 dB, but just because something has a higher dB reading doesn't mean it's actually louder, because there's a thing called perceived loudness. And I don't want to go in depth with that right now, but just keep that in mind for when you're mixing and balancing things. But to save room for that 808, I'm just going to add an EQ to that chopped melody. We'll right click on the first point, go to order, steep 8, and then we'll just bring down the low end. I'm just going to let that 808 cut through. Because if you look at an EQ here, you can see it's taking up a lot of those low frequencies. I might actually just change that kick for the rat kick. Alright, so we've got a nice idea down, we've got a rough mix. Now I'm going to go into the playlist, select the drums, and then select split by channel. And again, this will separate all of the drums onto an individual pattern. We can hold right click to delete them from here. We don't need the sampler, but if we left click, hold shift, left click again, it will highlight everything. And now we can drag these in. I like to stretch these out just so it's a bit easier to see. If we hold control and left click, then shift and left click, we can copy that over. So now we've got 16 bars, and in this playlist we're going to build out the arrangement of the whole track. A simple way to do it is to press Control and A, then Control and B a few times, just so we've got a few different parts to work with. Now in the intro we're going to keep this simple by deleting the drums. And because this part has got the strings in, we're going to save that for the hook. So we can start without the drums here. Now it's up to you whether you want to choose an 8-bar or a 16-bar intro. But 1 to 9 there, that's 8 bars. And we've got these two different parts. So this part's got the strings, this part doesn't. So we could have an 8-bar intro, and then this whole part here could be the hook. And we'll keep the hook at 16 bars. But we'll keep this whole part with the strings for the hook, just so it separates it. So as soon as those strings come in, you're going to know that that's the hook. In the first half of the hook, we're going to get rid of the kick, we'll get rid of the open hat and the rim, just for some variation. So now you can hear when it comes in. So now we've got this hook section. When it comes into this part, we've got the kick. And now in this part, this will be the verse. So for trap, the verse will usually be the same length as the hook, but then you'll have another section for the bridge, and then you'll go back to the hook. So after the hook, we're going to take some things out. So let's press C to activate the cut tool. We'll hold shift and right click to drag down. That's just going to take a few of the drums out. We'll save the rim, the open hat, the kick. So let's hear. So now you can hear things die down a little bit more, saving more space for an artist. Again, we'll bring the kicks and percussion in here. And then we've got this bridge section to work with. So let's take most things out. I think we could take the 808 out and maybe replace that with a sub bass. Let's try that. So let's add another pattern. We'll call this sub bass. We'll add that here. And then we'll just pull up a stop plugin, maybe something like GMS. Click here, and in basses, we'll just find one that we like. I like this respace. Call this sub bass. Press Ctrl and L, and that will send it to an insert. Hit F7 for the piano roll. And we'll just follow that same progression. And because of the way it's chopped, it sort of goes to this note first. I think we could find a better sound though. Let's go to my deep sweet. Try something like this. There we go. Just something to switch up the vibe. Right before the drop, we can take a few more things out. This up too. So now we've got a hook section, a verse, and a bridge. And when I structure tracks, I'm just thinking about tension and release. I'm thinking about keeping the excitement in the hook most of the time. So that's why we've got the melody with the strings there. And then when it comes to the verse, we just lose a bit of the energy and we remove some things to give it some room to breathe. And then it slowly builds back up. And then in the bridge, it kind of slows down a little bit again, because then when the hook comes in, it will just be a lot more impactful. So that's a nice simple structure to use. So we're just going to press Control, left click and drag. Then we'll press shift, left click to copy it. And now we've just repeated that whole thing. This section's the hook. So we could have the hook one more time. And then after that, we could just bring the melody in one more time. And that would be our full beat. Then if you want to fade it out, we could add something at the end called Fruity Balance. Right click on the volume and select create automation clip. Automation allows you to change things over time. And again, I'll go through that in the course, so don't worry if it's getting a bit complicated. I'm just going to skim through it now and draw in these points and bring it down. So all this is doing is bringing down the volume of the master, which is all the sounds together at this point here. And it's going to do it in this curve. So yeah, if you've been following along, hopefully you've made your first beat. And don't worry if things got a little bit complicated. That's the whole reason I made the beginner's course, and it's completely free. So if you want to go through things in a bit more in depth, then just click the link in the description or use the QR code here. The last two things I quickly want to show you are recording and exporting. So if you wanted to record something on top of this beat, whether it be in some vocals, or a guitar or a synth or something like that, first thing you need to do is obviously connect your device. So whether you're using an audio interface or something else like a USB mic, then if you hit F10, go to audio and just make sure you're using the right interface. Usually I have mine set to FL Studio ASIO, and then when I'm recording, I'll select the actual interface I'm using. For example, I'd click this, and then we can change the buffer length. The lower the buffer size is, the less latency you have. And latency is essentially the time it takes for the audio to get from the device to your computer. So if it's up quite high, your computer's going to process it a bit easier. It'll be less CPU intensive, but you might hear a massive delay from when you actually play the instrument or talk to when you hear it in this. So keep it as low as you can when you're recording. Then go to the mixer, select any empty insert, click up here, and then just select the insert. So for example, my mic is routed to input 1, and for vocals, you want to use a mono input. So we'd select that here, we can hit yes, and now you might not be able to hear it, but my audio is coming through because I can see it here. make sure that this record button down here is checked. Then go to the playlist, right click on record, and make sure you've got audio checked. We could turn off notes and automation for now. Then all you need to do is hit record and play. So I'm just recording this as a test. You might not be able to hear it, but you can see the waveform coming through. Let's turn off record. And now we've got this recording here. So I'm just recording this as a test. You might not be able to hear it, but you can see the waveform coming through. From here, you can add all of your effects and process into that insert, but I'm going to get rid of that for now. Now to export this full beat, we can see that everything has an insert. Sampler doesn't need one. Everything's named right. Make sure that song mode is selected, then go to File, Export, and Wave File. Now you can just select the folder you want to save it in. I usually start by adding my name. I'll add the BPM, which was 140 BPM, and then the key, which was C# minor. Click Save. Mode, make sure song selection is checked. We want to cut the remainder because it's the final version of the song. Leave remainder is just going to include any reverb tails, but we don't need that because we faded everything out anyway. I usually save an MP3 version and a WAV version. With a WAV, 24-bit should be fine. 32-bit if you want maximum quality, but most distributing platforms only require 16-bit, so 24-bit's a good medium. Want to make sure stereo mode selected. For the MP3, I just use 160 and I explain why in the course. Resampling, I keep that as high as possible. We want high quality for all plugins. And then if you want to export the stems, and by that I mean the individual track outs, so if you want the whole file as one, but then you want the individual files as well, so the kick, 808, any other sound that you've used, then just click split mixer tracks. That's handy if you're working with an artist and their engineer is going to mix the whole thing. But if you're not worried about that, just uncheck it and then you'll just have the MP3 and WAV file. You want to make sure enable insert effects is on, enable master effects, and then you can copy the rest of my settings if you need to. Then when you're ready, just hit start and it will export everything for you. And if you export the stems, you'll see I've got all of the individual files, as well as the master WAV file, which is the main one you'll need, and the MP3 file. The current file, you don't need that, so you can delete it. But let's have a listen to the full thing. So I kept the intro really simple, but there's loads of different effects you could try. You know, to say it's a simple one. Usually in the second half, I'll adjust the 808 to make it a little bit different. And then between sections, you might want to add things like transitions. Parts we don't have the strings. So this is where a rapper would spit most of his bars. And then we got this bridge. So if you like this video, make sure you like it and leave a comment and subscribe for more tutorials. And if you want to check out the full course for yourself, the link's in the description.